Welcome back to Bleach Revisited. I am Carter Gold, your host through this series in which we bring a more critical lens to every chapter of Bleach, really looking at the artwork as well as the narrative and giving a little bit of personal response to that, as I also talk about how these chapters relate to the rest of the manga, the stuff that comes later. So, if any of that interests you, feel free to jump ahead in the video, but as always, we start these videos off with a reading. So let's begin with the reading of Chapter 31, Heroes Can Save You. Ooh! Ah! A golden moment! Retreat! Bleach, Chapter 31, Heroes Can Save You. Whoa! Eh! What's this? While battling an invisible entity, Don Kanonji was suddenly hurled through the air, as if by some powerful force, and dragged towards the hospital. Then the glass door was shattered. Could this mean that an invisible enemy has captured Don Kanonji? Gosh, I wet my pants. You okay? Even if it is just a show, this is too weird. Yuzu, Karen, you girls okay? Did the glass cut you? Dad. Don't worry about me. If Daddy can give his life for his darlings, he'll die happy. Oh hey, is Ichigo alright? Ichigo. 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 Hmm, I knew it. So that's how you fight. Why are you running, boy? Let me go. You told me to run. No, I didn't mean. I told you to run, but not with me. I cannot run away. Huh? What? That does it. You keep saying I cannot run away. What the heck does that mean? How come I can run, but not you? Explain yourself. I'll throw that same question back to you, boy. I'm asking the questions right now. Very well. You must have some reason for me or for saying it. Why can't you run away? Well, it's because I am a hero. Yes, while by nature I am a man who abhors conflict, I am also a hero, so I cannot show my back to any enemy. Alas, this fool really wants me to smack him. Boy, boy, do you know what the ratings for my show are? Huh? I wish I didn't. Precisely! 25%! One out of every four citizens watches it. And many of the viewers are children. They're glued to the TV every week when my show is on, watching my heroics after dinner with their families. To them, I am a hero. Those children are inspired by my heroism. Watching me stand up to evil spirits, they learn what courage is. Do you understand, boy? I cannot run from the enemy, not with those children watching. Kanonji. Ha! Come on! Now that you understand, let's hurry back to the battle zone and fight that monster. What? Are you crazy? We can't do that. Why not? I can't fight here where there's no TV cameras. Let me go. If we fight near that crowd, people could get hurt. That wouldn't be very hero-like. Doesn't a hero protect his fans? That thing is a hollow. It eats souls with high spirit energy. It's drawn to the souls of people like you and me. That hollow will follow our energy into the hospital, and if we fight it in here, nobody but us can get hurt. Boy, you're amazing. You thought of all of that through while you fought. Amazing. Brrr. Here he comes. Come on. Huh. Uh, crap. The hallway's too small. Zabakto's useless here. I didn't think of that. What? Yeah. What is this gunk? It won't come off. I'm screwed. Rah. Okay, come on. I'll kick you to death. Rah. What? Are you hurt, boy? Kanoji, no. You can't beat a hollow. Run. I know. Though I do have a little power, I make it a point to assess my enemies very carefully. But you see, my boy, I was deeply moved by your selfless act. Though no one may ever know it, you fight with the safety of the public ever in mind. Your struggle is truly worthy of being called heroic. Allow me to call you comrade. No, thanks. And comrade, as my final act, let me fall like a leaf in autumn protecting you. Kanoji! Let me fall protecting you. What's the point of all this action without camera coverage? Yeah. That is it for Chapter 31 of the Bleach manga. So, good bit of yeah. Now, at least this is the time to jumble my words, if anywhere, right? Whenever I'm just jumping back to the beginning. Recording this, I messed up a few lines. This is like maybe my third take on it. I don't script these, by the way. I don't think I'll ever script these. I think there's something a little bit more genuine about giving an unscripted single take. It does end up more rambly. I could edit these, but I am uploading an episode a single day, and this isn't my job. So, I feel like this is the most earnest and honest way to do it, and I don't think I can make a more polished production without putting a lot more work into it. It's something to consider maybe whenever the channel gets larger, but I don't think I'm ever going to script these or really edit them down. This is what you get, and hopefully that's fine, Let me know your thoughts on it. Maybe you're of the mind that it could use that. Anyway, less on the craft of the thing and more on the thing itself. Let's get into Chapter 31 of the Bleach manga, into Heroes Can Save You, which is a kind of interesting chapter. It certainly builds these characters in a way that might have been a little unexpected. So I like already this kind of this first page I think is great, where we get the three different characters sort of coming to attack. Although I do kind of like the what is it, like it's the design for this hollow. It's very evocative of like Kabutops, or like that sort of you know like, is it a trilobite, whatever they are. um the fossil fish sort of dealios. Anyway, he's got that sort of deal going on with his mask design and the plating down his back. But I do think he looks kind of comical, and I think it works a little bit here. But I like that we get these kind of battle yells from our three participants. And it's really, what I like here is that it's really kind of unclear what each of them are going for. Ichigo's clearly thrusting with his hand. The hollow's coming for like probably a big bite. And yeah, Ichigo then grabs Kanoji by the neck to throw him out of the way of this hollow crashing into the front of the hospital, which is, pretty cool. It gets its head stuck, which I like, and that's kind of neat. I'm not gonna give One thing that I always kind of worry about with these videos is that whenever I get to the analysis and response, right, which is where we're at now, I get a little bit too much play by play, but I do just love the kind of way that this action flows, especially like kind of keeping it comedic as Ichigo has to do like two different kinds of fights where he's trying to protect Don Kanoji, who he doesn't really care for at all, but he feels like it's his duty to protect him, right? Especially coming where from Ichigo was before, where he's like, I need to get strong enough to protect these people. This is literally his chance to do exactly that, is protect these people, even if they're people that he doesn't really care for. But it's put a little bit at odds because most people would run away from this sort of a threat if they could perceive it. But Don Kanoji's kind of throwing himself at it, which is, of course, the issue. And this is exactly what happens yet again here, where he sees the hollow being stuck as a golden moment. I just love it, like whipping its head out exactly at that second. I think lots of really just good moments for these characters as far as the art goes. Like, I love Kanoji gripping, his cape back together as he goes for this golden moment, and then we get this hollow just breaking free. Like, it's punctuated so well, I feel. But yeah, here you get that plating down its back. You get to see that a little bit more. Um, yeah, and again, whenever I say like you'll see a lot more of Kubo really getting used to using the way the light falls on fabric for doing things, because a lot of these characters do wear black clothes. You see a little bit of that here. I think it works better, whenever you use just the full pools of white. The hash kind of shading here, which I assume is on Don Kanoji's leg, maybe. I don't think that's meant to be a part of his cape, but I don't know. I think that works better. I mean, this is clearly part of his hat that's sort of shaded this way. Anyway, regardless, I think it's kind of interesting to see how that sort of shading develops as we go along throughout the series. Now he gets a little bit better at kind of building those shapes through fabric, especially, and the way the light falls on that fabric. Anyway, obviously reference to, like Superman, right? Clark Kent. He's got the glasses. Notably, kind of interesting, Ichigo was originally, like, at least the earliest designs that I've seen of him, you can see some really early sketches if you look them up, have Ichigo with glasses. And then eventually the glasses were dropped from his design. But I don't know. I don't think it's a bad look, you know? So I think maybe to an extent, this is a little bit of a callback to that. The fact that Ichigo's original design had him in these kind of black frames. Yeah, interesting bit. Obviously, the idea is, he's Ichigo. He also very much, it's kind of interesting because, especially thinking about the idea of the typical like comic hero, right? Because not a lot of manga does straight up and down like hero stuff. Like this is very much the Western comic book hero is very much not what the typical manga hero is, right? Unless it's specifically trying to riff off of that and like kind of play toward homage towards it. But it is interesting to think about with Bleach because Ichigo, our protagonist, very much is this person who has this secret identity, right? He's got to hide the secret identity of him as a Soul Reaper from everyone else. And, it's this whole sort of like, there are these threats. Now, the difference being that the threats that are hollows, other people kind of just interpret those as natural disasters or, they don't really often, at least those that aren't spiritually aware, aren't aware of what's going on. So that's different. But the idea of like having this kind of hidden sort of alter ego superhero identity, versus civilian identity kind of thing, and also the idea that he has to kind of swap between those from his kind of plainclothes self is interesting. It's neat. Um, yeah, I don't know. That's that's always something kind of worth thinking about is the way in which same sort of dynamics come up. Despite the like genre being pretty different. Anyway, yeah, uh, of course we get a little bit more of how all the other characters are reacting as, the main conflicts gets dragged into the hospital, literally. Um, of course, we get Ishin kind of playing it off as a joke that, he'd protect his daughters, but, he realizes pretty quickly that they're both fine. That's why he does this whole, like, don't worry about me. If he can give his life for his darlings, he'd die happy. Which, as we know, is almost certainly a true sentiment, but he's very clearly hamming it up here. But I do like that their immediate response to check in on Ichigo. I love this shot of Ishin, ellipses on the floor. Uh, yeah, it's good stuff. Anyway, um, we get everybody kind of worrying about Ichigo. I wonder here because we get this zoom and then the zoom out, and I gotta imagine this is meant to be Orihime, and like this is just like a not a tear so much as just like the sweat drop. It's weird. This is a strange transitionary panel for me. I have to read it as Orihime just because of the way that the few bits of hair are drawn there. As well as the fact that obviously we immediately get a panel of Orihime in the same sort of configuration. Like she's still facing the same way, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it's hard to tell exactly. Anyway, so yeah, I won't harp on it too much, but it is a strange bit of using the art there. I do think that otherwise having everybody else kind of backgrounded in that kind of gray works. Maybe less so here with Karen. Like I think here with Orihime it works probably better. You could just leave the empty background space white, but trying to kind of work in the telephone line and or the power line and all of the background there, as well as the people. Clearly in this composition, it doesn't work as well for me. Um, I have a few other thoughts on this that might be spoiler related, so I'll include them in the spoiler section that might make a little bit more light on why everything's depicted this way. But yeah, that I think that at most is speculation. Anyway, um, yeah, I like that we get Tatsuki being kind of like questioning of exactly, or Hime who's like wondering if it's Ichigo, right? And Tatsuki being kind of curious about that. Chad, of course, full ellipses, and then we get this interesting bit from Kisuke where he's like, "So that's how you fight." I knew it, and I wonder what he's exactly speaking towards, right? Because clearly he's referring to Ichigo. I can't imagine this as being him talking about Don Kanonji. But the idea of like that's how you fight, as kind of maybe Ichigo being more of like this kind of protective kind of person, right? Clearly, this whole deal is like he's drawn his weapon and everything, but so much of Ichigo's mind is in this space of, okay, I'm gonna save this person and bring the fight somewhere else where it will involve less people, right? Like I'm gonna try to save as many people as I can. That's gonna be my priority, even if it puts me in a detriment that I haven't really realized, because obviously it's gonna be harder for him to swing his sword in a smaller space. I don't know if you know like I'm curious how much like this is something I should read into, right? Especially Keisuke being like I knew it, right? But clearly I think for us as the reader at this point, we're supposed to probably interpret this just as sort of Keisuke having a little bit more awareness of Ichigo and being a little bit more involved in Ichigo's entire situation than otherwise, right? Which we got a little bit of in the previous chapter, but here it's really laying it on for us that like, oh, this guy isn't some, completely unrelated character who's only going to show up as like a shopkeeper that kind of gets things wrong from time to time. Clearly he's more involved, is the point of this. Anyway, I do like the action of this page of Ichigo like running down this hallway, them having this argument, and Ichigo like pausing and then throwing Don Kanoji forward. I wish more of that wind up was sold to us because we really only get this yank here into the toss. But I do love that toss. Maybe it doesn't work as well as in the previous chapter whenever Ichigo was knocked out of his body and went tumbling. But I think it is a good visual, and it's pretty effective for Ichigo getting really fed up with Don Kanoji's like I can't run away sort of play heroics, right? Because for Ichigo, like actually protecting people and everything, and like having these sort of strong values is something that he's really built for himself organically. And so coming across somebody else that is also taking these really firm stances, but seems like such a faker, right? Like with Don Kanoji, like he really wants to kind of pin down this guy's character, and understand where he's coming from. Because of course, here Ichigo just saw that guy turn a spirit into a hollow as well, right? So in a lot of ways, Ichigo is sort of trying to get a feel out for this guy, but also this idea that he's telling Ichigo to run, but saying that he can't. That's something that like really is bothering him, which makes sense because from Ichigo's perspective, he has every reason to be in this fight, but he doesn't know why this guy does. Why Don Kanoji keeps insisting upon this sort of like I said, play heroics. I think this is really effective. Like we see a lot of kind of moments of jokes, and like I said, a lot of what Kubo will do with this structure is flip between like having a moment of levity into a more serious moment to help punctuate that more serious moment, and also to give us a breather, right? And so that's certainly what we've gotten a little bit of here. But I do really like appreciate how well Kubo uses just both the panels as well as character expressions, and like just the framing of things to really build those moods pretty quickly, because it's something that's really kind of subtle and easily done perhaps, but it's meaningful whenever you can pull it off. Here I don't know that Ichigo's brow into his hair quite works for me. This is a strange profile of Ichigo at the very least. But anyway, what I'm talking about here especially is that we get this kind of long panel of Kanoji doing this goofy stance, but the zoom to him in profile, and then getting this more serious shot of Ichigo sort of reacting to it, and then the close up of his lips, I think really sells like, oh man, he's gonna say something pretty serious. And so of course this gets played as a bit of a joke with Ichigo's reaction. But it's a very heartfelt sentiment from Kanoji, as we come to understand. And like, as much as and I tried to lean into that whenever I was doing the reading for it, because a lot of it is very showboaty, and like Kanoji really caring about his appearance, but then we get like actual serious rationale for that, which I appreciate. The kind of cool thing, again, I think using this sort of stippled backgrounds, Kanoji drawn with a little bit more detail, and like these small moments for him build him up and like make it a little bit more serious, even though clearly he's in a different wavelength from where Ichigo is. I love that. I wish I didn't, and he's like, yeah, precisely 25%. But yeah, we really get that transition to this being more serious, especially as Ichigo kind of comes out of all those comedic moments with a more understanding looking face, and we're kind of given that whole explanation that silly as Don Kanoji is, he still has this extreme awareness of how he's affecting others, and what he's doing, the sort of service that he's providing. So as much as he is this kind of really goofy spiritualist that's really made his career off of what could be seen as exploitative or kind of faulty, right? Because a lot of the stuff that he was dealing with didn't seem, it's like, oh, I'm banishing spirits from this pot, like whatever, right? It's like fake ghost show kind of stuff. But the idea that he has in his mind that what he's doing is this sort of these acts of courage, and that he's very aware of the demographic that he's kind of speaking towards. And to get a little metatextual with this, I think it's interesting to think about that within the context of the manga as well, right? Where, like, obviously this is adapted into an anime, but not at this point. The manga would be running for about 3 or 4 years before that. It started 2001. It got its anime in 2004. And this is only about like just short of a year of publication, as far as I'm aware, at this particular juncture. Um, anyway, point is that very much Kubo would be aware of the fact that he is writing essentially a series that would be consumed by younger people, right? Um, definitely kids this young, but also you know teenagers as well. But a lot of people that are going through, I mean, that's the entire Shonen Jump demographic, right? It's young boys and teenagers and girls too. But the whole idea of Shonen manga is meant to appeal to a male demographic. Anyway, um, that's why it's called Shonen. I mean, that's just the demographic. Like, is the Shonen, boys sort of demographic. Uh, but yeah, even though it is that sort of thing, it can still be enjoyed with by anybody or enjoyed by anyone. That's not the point. The point is that I think Kubotai here is really making it clear that he's aware of the sort of material that he's putting in front of really influential people. And I think it speaks towards like this burden that maybe he feels as a creator, right? That he feels like he has to create something that is, kind of heroic and conveys these sorts of values that people might take away from it, right? Something that might resonate with them. And so I don't know. I think it's interesting to think about it in that way. That in a lot of ways, as anime and goofy as Bleach can get, it's still very much aware of itself as a cultural product and as something that's being, taken in by a kind of influential youth. Um, I don't know. I don't think it ever strays from that. I don't think it ever, like, that's one of the things that I really do tend to appreciate Bleach for, is that it tends to be pretty, like, pretty nuanced in its messaging, but always pretty optimistic and always giving this really like strong sort of like you know not moral. Whenever I say moralistic, I don't mean like like high and mighty kind of morals. I mean like it really tries to kind of build like the importance of the connection to other people without it being hokey or sort of contrived. So I don't know, and it all works for me. Anyway, I like that he has this pretty serious moment, and it really seems like it's affected Ichigo. I love the backgrounds kind of becoming a wash in these designs, and then quickly, of course, we go back to Dakanoji being pretty flippant about returning to the fight, which I appreciate that like it's done literally with a hill turn into that less sort of serious uh, idea. I love that. Of course, he says all that, but he's like, "Oh yeah, we got to go where the TV cameras are." And then this gives Ichigo a moment to actually say something that is, somewhat profound and worthwhile, right? Ichigo brings up the whole idea that, like, they're going to fight here because nobody else will get injured or hurt. And Kanoji highlights, like, yeah, you thought about that all while you were under duress, right? While this monster was literally assailing us. That's really thoughtful. But I think the other kind of interesting thing about this is, the idea of, okay, these monsters, these hollows are drawn to people with high spiritual energy, so they're going to attack people like you kind of complicates Don Kanoji's whole, this being a public facade, right? I say facade, a public endeavor. Because obviously, if monsters can come seek him out, he's going to always be putting people in danger by including those people as a part of the film production and everything. So it does run that sort of risk, despite it being ostensibly, you know, something that he's trying to help people, instill this idea of courage. So yeah, that's kind of neat. Is that he's brought forth with this sort of complication. Obviously, that doesn't get handled in this instance, but I do like that that complication gets drawn. Obviously, we already kind of went through that arc with Ichigo, where he was really starting to blame himself for his mother's death, especially with the idea that Hollows were like the Grand Fisher had come after him because of his spiritual pressure, and his mom got caught in the middle of that. Um, but I think at this point, through the entire bit in the memories in the rain, we kind of come to understand that Ichigo has moved beyond that. That he doesn't really see the nature of Hollows as something that is something that he feels has to feel personally responsible for. But that's just like a part of the world, right? I do like this Hollow snapping up through the floor. I think that's just a great visual. I love also that the arc of its body kind of coming up out of that, and then arcing around here with the text kind of matching it. It's kind of neat. Um, this is always one of my favorite moments. Is Ichigo draws his sword and immediately gets it stuck in the root, like the ceiling. With his because Ichigo usually goes for that big overhead slash, and his signature move gets stopped by the geometry of the place. It is weird to think about because it's like, okay, well, you're a ghost. You have a ghost weapon. Shouldn't you just phase through walls? Like, clearly Rukia walked through his wall, right? Couldn't the same be true of your weapons? But also, I suppose, because clearly hollows can wreak havoc on physical things, right? The spiritual, you can push around people and all of that. So it clearly interacts with the physical objects. So it's interesting to see that it has that effect on even stopping them too. I don't know. It's loosey goosey with how much the physical and the spiritual kind of interact with each other. I think the assumption is that, yeah, they interact with each other, but sometimes they can be more ghost-like if they need to be, and not affect. But here, very much is in this kind of physical plane shared with the real world. I love that we get this hollow ability of him spitting this gunk at Ichigo and kind of tying his hands in place. I love, especially Ichigo's reaction of "I'm going to kick you to death." I think is a great one. Because face down with this, it'd be easy to panic or something, but instead he's continuing to have these sort of solutions. It is a more comedic fight than maybe we expect, but I kind of like that Ichigo's willing to bring it to that place. That he'll kind of tooth and nail come up with more and more interesting ways to engage there. I do like Don Kanoji blocking its bite with his stupid staff. And basically Ichigo insisting upon, no, you need to run, you can't fight this hollow, like you're not equipped to do it. And Don Kanoji insisting on being his comrade and that he's going to, make this big self-sacrificial final act, and that's where we cut the chapter. I think it's an interesting kind of back and forth. Obviously, I talk about using those moments of sincerity or those moments of kind of conflict abbreviated with comedy, and I think here, especially between a character like Don Kanoji and Ichigo, you get a lot of that back and forth, especially as one grows more serious and the other one grows more ridiculous. Or they're just not on the same wavelength. I think that really sells that, especially in this chapter, like the different way that these two characters kind of approach this situation, where Don Kanoji is very over the top in a performative sort of way, and is, incredibly sincere, but about like these kind of overwrought sort of things, where Ichigo is much more serious, and considering all of this from the perspective that he's been coming from, which is like a more private and personally sort of protective manner. But also he's not very he's not very talkative, right? He's like down to business. So this whole like overwrought, goofy, like allow me to call you comrade, and of course that's whenever we get Ichigo put onto like the back wheel, sort of doing the more comedic thing here. But it's a good, like I said, it's a good back and forth. I think it shows a lot about these characters, and it helps inform us a lot about, by seeing them juxtaposed to each other like that, we get to understand both of their traits a little bit stronger. Um, but yeah, it manages to make more out of this than I think how it initially could be written, where we kind of have this inept character in a situation over their heads. Because in a lot of ways, Don Kanoji does share a lot of in common with Ichigo, and being like this spiritual guy that wants to kind of help other people out, and has ostensibly noble goals, and is willing to kind of face enemies much more threatening than he is, or well, enemies that threaten his life and the life of those around him. So Don Kanoji is like really kind of willing to give his life to make this happen, which is very, very, very much in line with the way that Ichigo is, especially early on, right? So it's neat. It's neat to see, like I said, just how different these characters are, but also the things that they have in common, and how they kind of play off of each other, because ostensibly they do have the same goal, right, which is to defeat this Hollow. Though Ichigo's kind of goals end up not quite aligning with Kanoji's, because Kanoji wants to defeat this Hollow in this grand, heroic sort of display, and Ichigo is much more of a pragmatist about this. He wants to defeat this Hollow in a way that protects the most amount of people, and kind of keeps the conflict on the hush. So it's very much coming at it from a different angle, which is what's driving the conflict here, but also informing our understanding of these characters. It's good stuff, and it's shown really well visually too. Obviously, like the ways in which these characters are just depicted, oscillating kind of greatly between the two, even especially on the panels that I've kind of like I say hesitated on here, left left here on the screen. But yeah, I am a big fan of this chapter. I say a big fan. I mean, I like some of the earlier ones a little bit more, but this is a pretty good one for me. Anyway, I wish like this last moment of just ending on like Ichigo with the yell, Kanoji saying he's going to sacrifice himself is, it's a tense moment. It wants me. It wants me. It makes me want to get to the next bit. But it also, I kind of wish that whatever that sacrifice was had come there instead of in the next chapter. But it is effective the way it is. I do like this in between, where it's like they could just hear Don Kanoji yelling, and they're all like wondering what's going on with the production, because clearly it's gotten out of hand. Anyway, yeah, all in all, fan of this chapter. Much bigger fan of this arc than I thought I would be on a reread. Because my initial reaction, like I was never that big a fan of Don Kanoji. I think he's kind of he's funny, certainly, like funny in a way of like that's a goofy character that I'm amused exists within this series, but it's hard to take him seriously, obviously. But on revisit, I see those traits as a little bit more admirable, and maybe I have a little bit less contempt for him, because it's very easy to see him getting in the way of Ichigo, right, and wanting to root for Ichigo, our protagonist. And so having this kind of goofy, like silly looking dude get in the way of our more serious protagonist can, especially whenever you're younger, can be the sort of thing where it's like, man, get that dude out of here. I hate that dude, right? So I don't know. I think I appreciate the character a lot more, especially seeing how he's used too. Um, Not just in juxtaposition to Ichigo, but also because he's this public figure dealing with spirits. It gives this real effective narrative excuse to have all these other characters show up in this one place. And so that's something especially that I didn't really remember at all and didn't really think about, like why the character existed in the first place, right? Um, like if you think about like, okay, what function does this character have within the narrative? Like, what are they really doing here? It's interesting to think about. Okay, what is Don Kanoji really bringing to the table, right? He's being used as a prop to help us explain like how hollows form themselves. That's certainly going on in this arc. He's showing us how spiritually aware humans interact with and might see the sort of spiritual world, um, and the misconceptions they might have. But that's not like it's something that we haven't completely gotten in a few other places here. Uh, yeah, it does a lot of those sorts of things. Clearly we've talked about how he handles with Ichigo, but I think the idea of just this sort of public facing figure, especially in this series where so little of what our protagonist does is public facing, is interesting. And that you maybe need those more sort of public facing figures or events to draw in these other characters who might not have a really good reason otherwise to get personally involved. So yeah, it works for me. Like a lot more than I thought it would, are that I ever really thought about on my initial read. So I'm finding myself really surprised by this arc, how much I'm enjoying it, just like on a narrative level. Obviously, I don't think anything's affected me nearly as much as I've been affected by the stuff with Orihime's brother. That really resonated with me more personally. And then Ichigo's everything with Ichigo's mother um, isn't in a sore spot for me, but I've had parents that have passed away and everything. Though I don't really blame myself so much for all of that. I'm not caught up in the same space Ichigo's in, but at least I can feel like a good bit of empathy for the idea of like the family kind of being in disarray maybe, or changed because of that. I don't know. There's a lot there. So like while maybe this isn't an arc that I particularly emotionally resonate with, I do think the hero stuff is kind of neat in the way that like others see you. I think is something that I think about in my personal life from time to time, but and like the importance of the kind of work that you do. But as far as everything else, I think, like I said, the thing that's really surprised me is how entertaining and effective this arc has been, especially in the art as well. I think, again, just like in the expressiveness of these characters, and a lot more of confidence in like the line work and how they're all depicted, that really comes through. And you can really see him playing with expectations a little bit more and the way that things are built. But I could go on about that forever. All's there to say is that I'm enjoying it. Hopefully, you're enjoying it as well. This is one of my favorite things about the point of doing this reread is to see how I can interpret things differently from my first exposure to it, and how I might like or dislike things that I didn't on a first read. Um, so I certainly remember having like this certain takes on certain characters or events that I'm curious to see reading again, if how they'll land, especially because I ended up reading weekly too, after a certain point. um you know Basically, I could get more into it, but basically whenever I started the manga, I had a lot to catch up on, but then very quickly I got to the point where I was reading it weekly, and then that's where it felt like it was especially felt like maybe it started to drag as a manga as well, because again, it's written for that weekly format. So that's one of the things that I'm interested in, is seeing how well it stands up in a much tighter sort of format, reading it back to back like this. So far, this has been fantastic, and I've really enjoyed it. But I wonder how those kind of longer story arcs are going to end up, and if I will end up liking them more subsequently because of it, or if their length is still going to be that much of a drag for me as well. We'll see. We will see. Anyway, been talking about this for a while. Let's get into the talk about foreshadowing, about how things in this chapter connect. Of course, after I have a drink of water, because it is easy to get parched whenever you talk this much. Anyhow, so foreshadowing, spoilers, all that good stuff. Obviously, I think the biggest kind of moments to hop into, there's a couple of them, but the ones that I want to talk about. So here, something I realized at the last moment when we were talking about how this maybe doesn't work for me, this transition in the analysis. We see this figure that is moving to the right with this hair like this, and I wonder if that's meant to be Ishida, and if this is also meant to be Uryu as well, and that on a casual read we're supposed to overlook that because we do have him aligned kind of bottom right here. I don't know. Then would this be like just the beginning part of the frame of his glasses? Like, that's the weird thing. This is still weird for me, even if I read it as Ishida. So, and plus Ishida was closer to the line. Maybe he's leaving now because, everything that came down. I don't know. It's strange, but I gotta read it even with Ishida in mind as Orihime. It's just hard for me to kind of interpret that as him, even though that could be part of his silhouette. I don't know if this aligns with the kind of shirt that he's wearing. This looks like more of like the back of a hoodie kind of coming out. But I don't know. Anyway, the other big thing that I wanted to talk about is this line from Kisuke where he's like, "Oh, that's how you fight. I knew it." Speaking towards Ichigo, speaking towards him kind of taking this more protective, kind of pragmatic approach towards fighting, dragging the fight somewhere else. I wonder, because it's obviously we get a lot of the idea of Urahara cultivating Ichigo and kind of building him into who he is and kind of trying to figure out his strengths and weaknesses. And having such a big hand in his development and literally even his genesis, if we're to take Kisuke's investment in Masaki and Ishin to mean anything significant as well. So there's a lot there. You have to wonder how deep that goes, but yeah, it's interesting to think about this line inside of that context, and what that can also mean moving forward for how Kisuke kind of thinks of Ichigo. But as we know, like Kisuke's a character that likes to have all these plans. He likes to have, 1,000 different sort of contingencies or different ways to approach a problem. And so for him, it's really important to kind of understand all these different elements that are at play and these variables. And obviously, the biggest one for him moving forward is going to be Ichigo and how Ichigo is going to handle a conflict. And so it makes so much sense for Urahara to be very invested in. Okay, well, I like, of course, we get that I knew it. Like, he had already had this conclusion about it, but this is helping him reaffirm. The whole reason he came here was to reaffirm everything they knew about Ichigo and to really let him kind of know going forward what he would need to do. So that's neat. Um, yeah, I don't know that any of this other stuff, especially the idea of like others kind of having this perception of him and needing to be a hero, not being able to run away. Certainly, like, and especially like the insistence on having this more kind of private fight, because it's more pragmatic to do that, fits within Ichigo's wheelhouse entirely. And the idea of Ichigo, of course, not being one to back down or run away makes a lot of sense. Obviously, with Don Kanoji, as we know, uh, he kind of doesn't get a lot going on after this. I mean, he shows up in Spirits Are Forever With You, but that Spirits Are Forever With You. In the manga itself, I don't know. It's yeah, it is what it is. But he's here for now. So maybe whatever I talk about how important this is like Kanoji and Ichigo bouncing off each other. Obviously, it's for takeaways for Ichigo, right? It's to see how this character helps to develop Ichigo and kind of give him perspective as well as help us understand Ichigo a little bit more. But yeah, I love Ichigo kind of going for the Getsuga motion and then getting his sword stuck, of course. I also like the hollow sticking him further into this situation, really trapping him in it. There's a lot of like Kubo. Kubo really does like the idea of Ichigo's or is very aware of Ichigo gripping his sword. I've noticed it's kind of interesting. Earlier we got that bit with acid wire, and he spits the acid on Ichigo, makes him drop his sword, and Rukia calls him a disgrace. And here, Ichigo is the demi hollow turned hollow. Spits this gunk and gets him stuck on his sword. And I think later in the fight with Ikaku, right, doesn't he wrap the binding around his sword so that he won't his grip won't slip on it or anything like that. So there's a lot kind of going there, and then later, it's thinking about it also. It gets the chain, which obviously the really cool thing is watching, Zangetsu spin it around by its chain or its, the wrapping. But more than that, whenever he goes into Mugetsu form, right, the chain is wrapped all the way up his arm, and the sword has sort of become a part of him too, as far as I remember. So there's a lot of this the idea of Ichigo and his kind of connection to holding his weapon, and that sort of attentiveness to how a character holds their weapon, the weapon being a physical thing they hold, is something that is sort of true throughout all of Bleach. Obviously, we get the huge meme moment of Kenpachi holding his sword with two hands, right? And I think that even gets referenced later with Unohana, whenever uh, Yachiru, or really Retsu, I guess, which isn't really her name, but anyway, whenever Unohana is fighting Kenpachi, and she brings up and when I say Kenpachi, I mean Zaraki. Jeez, these characters and all their fake ass names. Whenever Zaraki and Unohana Yachiru have a fight, um, whenever they fight, I think she specifically calls out Zaraki for not doing anything with his other hand. Wielding a weapon one-handed, but not really using his other arm for anything meaningful. So there's interesting things like that. That very much I think Kubo is really aware of these characters wielding their weaponry, and that's interesting to think about, and that sort of attentiveness, and that's why we have within 30 chapters we've had two moments where a hollow has had some sort of attack that affects the way that somebody holds their weapon. That's kind of neat. I don't know. It's something I didn't really pay a lot of attention to on a first go round, but I think now I've really noticed that, and it's an apparent kind of through line through a lot of Bleach. I don't know. It just shows a little bit more consideration towards these characters and how they manipulate their weaponry. Though that tends to be the case throughout. Especially whenever you think about the Quincy. Especially Ishida, right? There's a physicality there. I think Kubo really likes just drawing these characters, handling these weapons in a cool way. One of the big things is that Bleach was, at least big rumor was that Bleach was originally pitched as a series called Snipe, where everybody would have guns, and then was told, no, give all the Shinigami swords, you idiot. Swords are way cooler. And now thinking about it, looking at Burn the Witch, right? Burn the Witch is a series where everybody has guns and it works just fine. Now, yeah, they call the guns wands and they're technically horns, but look at the action of that and tell me those aren't just guns. But at the same time, Kubo was all about posing these characters really cool, and having these really cool kind of moments of them handling their weapons. And so I think he gets a lot of leverage out of something that I think most authors probably wouldn't give as much thought to. You know, Obviously, like you think of some like the biggest like kind of attacks in shonen manga, right? The ones that are really memorable, like right, you have the Kamehameha, and the Kamehameha has a very clear physicality to it, right? Everything that you do with your hands and your body posture, it's incredibly memorable and iconic. If you think about, I mean, to a less, Rasengan's just ripping on Kamehameha. I can't really, but if you look at, I mean, I think One Piece does a good job with its physicality, especially for Luffy. But if you look at like Hunter x Hunter, or Hunter Cross Hunter, or Hunter x Hunter, or whatever the fuck way you want to call the damn manga. If you look at Hunter x Hunter, Gon's whole rock paper scissors, right? That clearly, I mean, obviously it's rock paper scissors. It's yeah, you're lifting it from something else, but there's still like a real clear idea, like in physicality behind the move. Um, and I think that's all effective manga is gonna do that to a degree. That's why I find the action in series that aren't paying that much attention to the physicality of the way these characters are interacting to be less interesting. And I mean that's generally why I like earlier martial arts sort of driven Dragon Ball, and I think a lot of people tend to have this take as well, rather than whenever it becomes all shooting beams later on, just firing lasers at each other. And I'll even that said, I still think the Kamehameha is a really effective use of that sort of a move. Um, but you get a little bit less of that. You get that in the Masenko and stuff. What I'm trying to say here is that Kubo clearly has the chops to pull that off, regardless of the weaponry, and clearly is very, very much thinking about how these characters are wielding their weapons, or how this character is being posed, and effectively kind of selling the action of the moments, rather than just having these sort of meaningless exchanges of strength. So yeah, it's something neat to look at, especially whenever we start to consider, Shikai and Bankai and resurrections and things like that. I think whenever Bleach is working its action the best, it's really considering the physicality of these characters and the weapons that they're wielding. And whenever Bleach is not working so well, it's whenever that physicality isn't really conveyed to us as effectively. That's why like moments, there's moments in the manga that some people don't like, that some people are, especially I'm thinking about Thousand Year Blood War now. Whew, this is a ramble. Anyway, dial it in, Karakura. Uh, anyway, but in the Thousand Year Blood War, again coming back to that fight between Zaraki and Retsu, um, I think there's like just a ton of physicality to their interactions and like towards that fight, and it worked really well for me. At least on the first read, we'll see how I feel, over 5 years later. But it'll be almost 7 by the time I get to it. Sheesh. Anyway, in this series at least, but that really worked for me. And what I constantly see people saying in comments on stuff now that the anime is coming back, is that they hope that all of that gets more fleshed out and explained to us. And I'm on the mind that I hope it fucking doesn't. Like if anything, if the anime adds anything, I hope that it beefs up the fights in that physicality department, in the places where they were lacking it. But that was always a fight where I felt like everything came across very clearly visually. Like, yeah, we don't get a concrete description for what Retsu's Bankai does, but we see it used, and like we get very clearly physically what's happening between these characters in this exchange. So it doesn't leave me that confused. It's not something that I need a character to say like, and this is what my power does, Zaraki. you know, like I think that would cheapen it to an extent too. Yeah. And obviously, I'm not. I'm clearly a little bit more of a purist on that. I think the manga got it right enough. That's not the sort of thing that I would want to see more of, kind of expanded upon. Like I said, I would want moments that maybe don't feel as physically visceral or come across as strong to be sold a little bit better. Because there's moments where, like, especially like in some of those fights where it you can feel like, like 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 exactly what is happening doesn't really, maybe like the physicalness of it or the exchange of it doesn't really carry as well. I don't know. It's hard. I wish I could bring up some like exact moments, but I'm trying. I'm thinking of, like, especially with all those Bankai reveals. There's some that work, I think, really well. Like with Kisuke's, I think it's really fantastic. Whereas with, like, Shunsway's, as cool as it is, that fight with Lily Baro, so much of it is just like, I there could be more to really give the sense of the interaction between those characters and them really affecting one another. Uh, but I don't know. Maybe I'm off my rocker with that. Anyway, we'll see. I just hope that they do it its due diligence. And it's not like Perrot hasn't done or Piro or whatever, Pero, whatever the hell. It's not like in the original run of the anime they didn't already give it a pretty good treatment in some regards. I mean, I can remember the Hisagi versus Findor fight being one that was really touched up to the point where, like, the anime version of that fight ended up feeling a lot better than and like more physical, more of an exchange than the manga version. And I think the same went for the first invasion with Grimjow and Ichigo. Geez, I mean, again, really rambling here. Really, probably been talking like 15 minutes off of this one sort of exchange between this fucking no-name hollow piece of shit and Ichigo. Point is, Kubo tends to have pretty clear idea of how to use these characters physically and interact with their weapons and each other, and that physicality really tends to be really thought out. And I think it culminates in this moment in a way that I really like, where Ichigo, like the idea of like Ichigo's sword being too big so it gets stuck inside of the ceiling. That's great. And then this hollow spitting up gunk on Ichigo's weapons, so now he can't let go of it, so he's stuck there. That's even better. And then Ichigo being like, "I'm gonna kick you to death." Like, this page just works so well for me in that regard, and just really considering the physical aspects of what's actually happening here between these characters and building on that in a meaningful and effective and interesting way. And because Ichigo's bound up in all these ways, he can't stop Dagon Kanoji from doing his big, stupid, super sacrificial bullshit. Like, that's great. And we'll only get more of that throughout the rest of the manga, and I think this is a really good moment that keys us into the fact that Kubo is really thinking about those sorts of elements and on how to build on those elements. I think any moment in the manga that, really kind of, like, those are some of my favorite moments that really build on themselves in that way. Like, one that comes to mind is the Suzail Aparo fight, right, with both Renji and Ishida, where Renji wraps Suzail inside of his Shikai, and then they explode the whole thing with with Renji using the Kido, and then that ends up being all a smoke screen, so that Ishida, while they were wrapped inside of the Shikai, could set up his big Quincy explosive technique. Like, that series of really thinking about, like, okay, Renji's got this kind of weapon that can be used in this way physically to, basically wrap these two people up, and then he could do this sort of self sacrificial attack, and then all of that could distract from this other thing that's happening. Like, so much of that is really considering the physical elements of what's at play in this conflict, and I think it tells us a lot about these characters, and it shows us a lot about this, what their kind of strategies that they're going through, and also just kind of how they're approaching this battle. Like, obviously here we get a lot of Ichigo's kind of tenacity and inventiveness, but also him being a little stubborn with rushing in and getting his sword stuck, right? Anyway, great stuff. I can see how this resonates forward within Bleach. It's a moment that I completely, like. I remember Ichigo in his sword stuck. I didn't remember ever all the rest of it here, but it's a moment that I didn't expect to be as kind of resonant, or as sort of a moment that really spoke towards something that Kubo really kind of is keyed into as a shonen author. So I don't know, it's cool. It's a cool moment. Not what I thought I would be talking about the most during this episode. I thought I'd be talking about that bit with the cheater, the bit with Kisuke the most. But yeah, that's it. That's what I got. This episode's going to be another long one. Sorry, not sorry. It is what it is. This has been Carker Gold, as always, with the Bleach Revisited. Thank you so much for watching through this entire video. Never forget, spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.